Ah, Daggerfall. That beautiful, ancient video game known for its massive world map and being vastly overshadowed by each and every one of its younger brothers. I love Daggerfall, but whenever I play it, I've usually made myself extremely overpowered with few, if any, downsides. I began a blind playthrough stream exactly 3 years ago, and I've learned quite a bit of what I did wrong back then. Nowadays, the game is easy, because I know how to make an extremely powerful character from the get-go, making myself immune to magic, with high damage and a lot of magicka to spare. Knowing how to do this in character creation makes Daggerfall, a game that is somewhat notorious for its difficulty, into a cakewalk. Fun, but not particularly challenging, barring occasionally getting lost when you forget to mark the entrance to a dungeon. So I asked myself a question. How can I use this knowledge for evil? I wanted to try to make the weakest character possible and beat the game with them, just for shits and giggles. Let me lay out my ground rules for this run. First, and most important, I must complete the main story. That means completing the quest Journey to Aetherius and all of its mandatory prerequisites. Second, I need to try and kneecap myself as much as I possibly can in character creation, while still being a legal class. That means I'm not using mods or anything to make myself weaker, and I'll explain why I made the decisions I did in character creation. And final rule, no external maps or puzzle solutions. I have beat this game before, and while it's been a while, I think I should at the very least be able to find my way through each dungeon on my own. So let's get into this. We're starting up a new game in Daggerfall Unity, and the first thing we're greeted with is character creation. So let's take a look. All of the elven races have pretty solid abilities. Dark and Wood Elves get bonus damage and chance to hit, and High Elves have immunity to paralysis, so they're all out. The Redguards have the highest bonus damage and chance to hit, while Nords and Bretons get a 30% resistance to frost and magic respectively. These are also very solid traits that are actually useful to a character's build, which of course means that they're not allowed for us either. That leaves us with only the beast races. Khajiit get a plus 30 to climbing checks. Allow me to explain, since climbing never made it out of Daggerfall. The skill allows you to climb walls, so long as you continuously pass skill checks. That's not a plus 30 to the skill, by the way, so no other race will ever climb as well as Khajiit will. It's a very convenient ability, but not actually necessary. And finally, there's Argonians, who get reduced fatigue loss while swimming, and they can hold their breath just a little longer than others. There are no main quest dungeons that force you to swim in any capacity. Hey, Future Reg here, this is a lie. There is one very important quest that does require you to swim, but you get the ability to breathe underwater anyways, regardless of race. Okay, back to past Rag. As such, Argonian is what I'm going with. Next up, we'll make a class. First thing I'm going to do is decide on our primary and major skills. Now, strap in, because this is going to get a bit complicated. If you're familiar at all with Morrowind or Oblivion's leveling systems, you might think you have some idea of what to expect. You don't. Your level is determined by this function. If you're curious about the specifics, I'll leave a link to the relevant UESP article and you can look at it yourself. Basically, your entire level is determined by 6 skills, and any combination of 15 levels in those skills is a character level. Can't be that bad, right? Can it? Oh, you'll see. So, picking our skills is going to be fairly easy. We're going to take every single magical school. Doesn't matter specifically which ones go where, so long as we have 3 in our primary, 2 in our major, and 1 in our minor. Bear with me for a moment. Magic in Daggerfall is really strong, arguably overpowered, if you know what you're doing with it. But we're going to turn all of these selections completely useless in the next section. In any case, we're going to take the 6 least useful languages as our last major skill and the rest of our minor skills. These will be Spriggan, Nymph, Dragonish, Centaurian, Giantish, and Harpy. Leveling a language skill naturally, i.e. running into them in the wild, is extremely slow and unlikely to contribute to our overall levels. In addition, these skills aren't likely to make or break any of our combat encounters. Next is our advantages and disadvantages. and now I'll explain how we're neutering our magical proficiency. Our first two advantages are increased magery 3x and spell absorption. These are usually really solid picks, but are completely negated by our much more detrimental first two disadvantages. These are darkness and light-powered magery. Darkness-powered magery means that we can't use magic in daylight, and its counterpart means we can't use magic in darkness. With both, that means you can't use magic at all, completely negating our increased magery and making naturally grinding our primary and major skills almost impossible. It also negates our spell absorption. Spell absorption works by converting damaging spells into magicka, and it can't do that if your magicka is completely full, as ours will permanently be. You see why these skill choices are pretty funny now? After that, I've chosen low tolerance to shock and magic, as well as critical weaknesses to frost and fire. Frost and fire make up the bulk of the damaging spells we'll run into. I offset these with regenerate health, rapid healing, athleticism, acute hearing, and adrenaline rush. Side note, I don't bother with the damage from sunlight or holy places disadvantages. We're not going to be outside for long enough for it to be a relevant downside, and I would have needed to give myself another actually impactful advantage, or way more health in order to use it. Regenerate health and rapid healing are arguably pretty useful, but they're necessary in order to make the class legal to even play. Recovering health over time sounds really strong until you take into account two things. First is that if you run out of fatigue in a dungeon, you'll die anyway, as you fall to the ground and are easy prey for monsters. Fatigue is like health and by default does not recover unless you sleep. Second, the enemies who we're really worried about will kill us in 1 to 2 hits anyways, even at full health, which makes recovering it all but pointless. The other three are minimum value advantages, whose benefits are difficult to notice, but they move our little slider into legal class range. Finally, we have to muck about with our class's stats. Immediately, agility and endurance need to be dropped. This makes us extremely easy to hit and very fragile. Intelligence being high technically boosts all of our language skills here, but the amount of these enemies that we run into is going to be fairly low since most of them are fairly rare. Dropping our willpower makes us less likely to resist the effects of spells our enemies cast. Personality will do literally nothing for us this run since we won't be talking to NPCs for any quest-related reasons. Our speed and strength are pretty decently high, which is normally great, but when your agility is as low as this, you aren't able to hit people for shit. Not to mention that combat is completely disincentivized, since we can't actually gain any levels or anything from it. Speed isn't a completely dead stat to us, but I'm going to be acquiring some equipment that will push it to fairly high levels anyways, so this feels like it would be less impactful in the long run than strength. Not to say that this is some kind of pacifist run, just that we're going to suck shit at combat. The numbers look awkward, but I promise it's intentional. I'm attempting to avoid the breakpoints at each 10 levels. We'll go over them again when we look at our final character sheet. Next up is the career path quiz. I wasn't sure how much of an influence this would be on our run, given that there's also the option to simply auto-generate, but I figured that I should take every possible opportunity to create disharmony and non-bows in our build, so here we go. This class explanation is already pretty long-winded, so here's a summary of what the quiz gave us. Long story short, I tried to avoid giving us anything too useful. I avoided most reputation changes, but I don't actually think those have too much of an impact on us anyways. At long last, we can do our final stat roll, trying to keep everything as low as we possibly can. Now, when we look at these numbers, the only one that actually matters is the tens place. A skill in the tens either has a +1 or a -4 modifier, and every 10 points up from there increases that modifier by 1, either going to a +2 or a -3, and so on and so forth. The distribution we chose intends to keep our willpower, agility, and endurance in the tens for the entire run. As we level up, we gain 4 to 6 points to distribute across these skills. For us, however, we're going to be save scumming in order to force a low roll of 4 skill points per level, meaning we're going to gain 36 points divided across all of these skills. We're going to be maxing out our intelligence first, and then trying to avoid increasing any skills that might accidentally be relevant as we go on. In summary, our class is a mage who literally cannot cast spells. Our poor Argonian here is gifted and talented, but because of a birth defect, he's got no way to generate magicka. He's got glass bones and paper skin, and while he might be a little more toned than the average mage, He's so uncoordinated and clumsy that if he hits anything, it was probably an accident. He's got a high personality score, but personally I like to think that's just because he's so pathetic that people take pity on him. His best stats are speed, intelligence, and luck. Most importantly of all, his life is never going to get better, even as he levels up. This little guy needs a fitting name, and I think I have just the thing.
Excuse the gloom.
And with that, we crash on the shores of Daggerfall on the 4th of Morning Star, and end up in our first dungeon, Privateer's Hold. The Emperor has sent us to do two things: erase an embarrassing DM he sent to the Queen of Daggerfall, and figure out what the deal is with Lysandus' ghost. Seems to me like you probably should have called a priest, but what do I know? I mean, I'm only a genius. Now, if you're not very familiar with the game, you may have heard that the dungeons are randomly generated. This is only technically true. The world's many dungeons were randomly generated once in 1996, and those dungeons now exist permanently as they are. Privateer's Hold is identical in every playthrough, and so is every other dungeon. That's why I know exactly the route to escape this dungeon in record time. As mentioned, we're going to suck at combat. But to my knowledge, there's no way to beat the main quests without doing at least some killing. So we're going to want to get some decent equipment. You may be familiar with the Daedric artifacts, but here's the problem. Acquiring any of them costs hundreds of thousands of gold. As it stands, we can only get a loan of about 50,000 from any given bank. This is important because we're going to be doing the main quests at their minimum level requirements, which unfortunately will end up making two of these quests incompletable for this run. Luckily, they aren't necessary to finish the game, but it does rob us of a little bit of story. You see, initially, I was under the impression that I needed to collect the first 200,000 very quickly, because I would miss the summoning day for Meridia. But as it turns out, I will never have access to a good, legitimate Daedra summoner from the Mages Guild, because I can't actually use any of my magical skills. All of my main skills have a level cap of 51, because that's as high as any trainer can take them. Speaking of training, that also means that level 10 for us is going to cost around 66,000 gold. Training a skill costs 100 gold times your character level, so at 15 training sessions per level, things get quite expensive. Regarding summoning at temples, it's technically possible, but would require training one of my extremely low skills to a rank of 63, as well as grinding reputation with said temple. What this means for the run is that if I want any Daedric artifacts, which I do, I will need to spin the wheel of RN Jesus at Witches' Covens. Great, can't wait for that. I have 4 particular artifacts in mind, but for now that's not important. We'll worry about those at levels 3, 5, 7, and then 10. As such, I spent a little while running between regions and collecting 50,000 at a time. The only places I avoided taking out loans are the 3 biggest kingdoms of Daggerfall, Sentinel, and Wayrest. Primarily because I'll be needing to visit them semi-regularly, and I'd rather not have to run from the guards for the entire visit a few months down the line. Now, as anybody who's played Daggerfall can tell you, gold has weight. Literally. In later Elder Scrolls games, gold is weightless. You can carry around as many septims as you can loot, barter, or steal. In this one, 100 gold is about a quarter of a kilogram. Not super heavy, by any means. A night at an inn is between 2 to 6 gold, and the most expensive weapons and armor will probably run you in the low tens of thousands of gold. With a decent strength stat like we have, you can carry around 43,000, well over a practical amount. However, the amounts of gold we're going to be using is well over the normal amount. 300,000 gold weighs about 750 kilos, which is the most that a wagon can handle at once. All this really means is that every 300,000 we get, we're going to need to go to a bank, deposit all of our money, and pay a small fee to turn that gold into a banknote. We can use these banknotes almost like debit cards. Eventually, I returned to Daggerfall, and begin training at the Mages Guild. I thought it'd be a good idea to spend our in-game time wisely, and also bought a set of elven armor and a sword. Since our character is going to suck, I decided that equipment would have to carry us. It's during my first day of training and shopping that I received our first letter. This is from Brysienna Magnuson, and she's an agent of the Emperor here in Daggerfall. She wants to meet up with us and tell us we have a month to do so. After checking how long it takes to get there, I conclude I can get to at least level 3 before I meet her. That's a little over 2 weeks in-game of training, shopping, and then sleeping so that I can do it all over again. For the record, I plan to tackle the rest of the main story quests as soon as I receive them, but seeing as this one was just a meeting with no dungeons or enemies associated with it, I feel no guilt in putting it off until later. Since this character build all but requires us to use trainers for every single level we get, we're not going to be spending a lot of time in dungeons grinding for skill ups. As such, I figure it's probably fine to use each in-game day to check the shops for useful equipment, but truth be told, this took forever, and with how squishy we are still going to be at level 10, it may or may not end up mattering. By the 8th day, I have a full set of elven equipment, and I can just spend the rest of my time leveling up to 3. Wake up, go to the guild, go back to the inn and sleep. Walking back to the inn at night is actually kind of scary because we're getting attacked by ghosts and you hear quite a bit. In any case, we ding 3 without ever once killing an enemy, and now we're off to meet Brysienna. When we get to her, she explains that ghost we saw is actually the spirit of King Lysandus, haunting his former subjects. She suggests we investigate the nobles of major players in the region to see if we can learn anything relevant. She also tells us that the letter the Emperor was talking about was apparently handed off to a courier who we don't even know the name of at the moment, so that really narrows down where it could be. With that, she says that apparently if we mention her to anyone, it's more likely to hurt than help. Great. In any case, we've finally technically made some progress on the main story. This is followed up quickly with another letter that we received right after dinging 3. This one is from Morgaya, the princess in Wayrest. In it, she claims to have information regarding the, quote, fate of a certain letter. Chances are this broad knows something useful, and it's not like we have any other leads at the moment, so we might as well go chase this one. So we head up to Wayrest and see what's what. Well, it turns out this is a bit of a you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours type of situation. She wants some help getting a letter to a certain high-level sorcerer at the necromancer's crypt, a place called Skurg Barrow. These friendly fellas apparently believe that death is a reward, not a punishment. Luckily for Pleads for Mercy, this is a simple letter delivery, so we don't actually have to kill anybody to do this. That said, I'm a nosy fella, so of course I want to know the contents of the letter, and right off the bat it's addressed to the King of Worms, so that's great. For anybody who doesn't remember, or perhaps never knew this, it's Mannimarco, the same Mannimarco who you kill in Oblivion, and the same one who is responsible for the Necromancer's Moon, which allows for the creation of black soul gems in Oblivion. Basically, this is the head honcho of Elder Scrolls Necromancers, maybe second to the slowed Nagasta from the Second Era. So we're off to deliver the letter. Truth be told, I wasn't sure I would remember the path to the King of Worms' throne room, so to speak. Luckily I did, because this dungeon is actually quite large and easy to get lost in. Odds are we'll be returning here sooner rather than later, so we have that to look forward to, which will be fun. He's pleased with the contents of the letter and wants us to courier his response back to Morgaya. Hopefully now she'll be forthcoming with the information we want. On the way out of the barrow, we are accosted by a few zombies, but fortunately they aren't able to go up these extra large stairs that exist for some reason. Hopefully we haven't been diseased by the few hits we took, or this could be rough. Returning to Morgaya, she seems very pleased with the response Mannimarco gave her, which is concerning given who she's consorting with, but hey, that's none of my business. Apparently the letter that we want is with the Orcish warlord. The letter was stolen from Queen Abakai, but she recommends cozying up to Minisera, the former Queen of Daggerfall before the death of her husband Lysandus. She recommends avoiding a direct approach and starting off with someone of a lower station. So that's 3 more potential leads we can chase down. The current and former Queens of Daggerfall, and Gortwog the Warlord. Deciding that 2 leads is better than 1, I return to Daggerfall and steal away into an inn to avoid the vengeful ghost of Lysandus for the night. The next morning, before I can even make it to the castle, I get another letter announcing the engagement of Morgaya to some schmuck named Caradil. That's thanks to us! Anyways, in the castle, I try to talk to what I presume to be the cook, but she informs me that I'm too weak to be helpful at the moment. Unfortunate, but what can you do? I then try the other door that is marked with the royal seal. Apparently that wasn't allowed, and I have to leave the castle to reset the enemies. As it turns out, there's a clause in the guard's text that says you can't leave the main castle area without royal say-so. Oopsies. That leaves just Obkai. She's worried about her husband's grandma, Nulfaga. She's offering a pair of magical boots if we can face the horrors in Nulfaga's castle and report back on her health. This sounds promising, but I don't hear anything about letters, so I'm pretty sure it's not really going to help me any. I figure why not and take the quest anyways, and she gives us a generous 5 months to get this done. That's kinda nuts. After resting up in the castle, I head out to Shadungeon. Now obviously I've been here before, and I know the password to enter her main room is shut up. So of course I do that, and I'm immediately met with 2 mages who I get very lucky against. For some reason, after I saved against the first spell they cast, they kept trying to hit me in melee, which they're about as bad at as I am. I ended up on top, but this shit took forever and could have just as easily gone the wrong way. I talked to Nulfaga, and she seems to be doing that thing that oracles do, where they say a bunch of stuff that makes them sound insane, but is actually probably nothing but facts. In any case, it's incomprehensible to my unenlightened lizard brain, so I'm just going to go back to Obki now. The queen seems very happy to learn that Nulfaga is still alive and hands us some boots without much fanfare. I guess I should figure out what these do. Huh. Frost boots of ice storms, eh? Seems like we might be able to use magic yet. For reference, magical items in Daggerfall don't actually need to be equipped to be used for their active magical effects. These boots are effectively a weapon that we're going to be saving for when they're most relevant. It's also important to note that while magical items can be used to level up the relevant skills, they only scale off of your total character level. And since I'm in the neighborhood, I might as well get some magical training in. We're going to be waiting on either a letter or another level before we get our next quest, so I figure this is a good use of our time. While doing so, we reach our level cap of 51 for alteration, so it's on to the next school, Destruction. While doing this, I accidentally trained a Dragonish once, which was a little annoying. It's at this point that I'm struck by the realization that I haven't put this 200,000 gold that I have to good use yet, and so I set out to do exactly that. The run there isn't exactly eventful. If you're familiar at all with Skyrim, Oblivion, or Morrowind, you know that there's a lot to find out in the world just by looking. Unique side quests and dungeons to explore. In Daggerfall, it's all much more spread out. The odds of finding new towns or dungeons while running in the overworld is pretty minuscule, and there aren't any events or quests outside of the guilds and the main quests. Anyways, this is the Coven on the Bluff, and they will be our Daedra summoners for the evening. It's time to spin the Daedric Prince Gacha Wheel! Okay, it's not a true gacha wheel, since they tell you which Daedra they're going to summon before asking for your money, but it does require a lot of traveling back and forth to avoid your rest getting interrupted by archers and rats and other annoying things. During one of these back and forths, I received my follow-up letter from Obki. It's not time-sensitive, according to her, so I decide to try and get this Daedra summoning over with first. As luck would have it, the first Daedra we're going to summon is... wait, shit, I forgot to turn my gold into a banknote so that I could spend it. Alright, back to Daggerfall, where of course I arrive at night and have to dodge old Lysandus. After fucking up and getting scammed out of some money, I managed to finally leave with a letter of credit for 200,000 gold, which should be all I need for the hags. Alright now, the first Daedra is... Boethiah! Boethiah wants us to kill a man who's apparently been annoying her for years. But what's better is he's holed up in Privateer's Hold, a place we all know and love. The quest is indeed going to take us back to the very first dungeon of the game. Well, there's no time to waste, let's get in there and kill this dude. So, first I went up to the top room because it has a secret door that I remembered at least one enemy spawning in for a side quest I went on in a previous playthrough. But after opening the door and finding nobody except a skeleton who killed me, I figure he's probably down where we started our little fire so many weeks ago. We get down there, and lo and behold, he's just on the other side of the secret door. Honestly surprised he went down so easily, but I suppose we should count ourselves lucky he didn't use a lightning spell instead of silencing us. All things considered, it seems like we're still doing kind of okay, but then we are only level 3. Once we have to deal with any vampires or liches, I doubt things will be quite so simple. Anyways, let's go get our ebony mail that we will never ever remove. We meet up with Boethiah's contact at the library, and this is an amazing piece of armor. So let's go over it, shall we? First of all, that +8 armor? A lie. It's +17. Second, if we use it, it temporarily gives us resist fire, shield, and spell shield. Resist fire gives us a % chance to halve the damage we take from fire, shield will absorb melee damage up to the spell's limit, and the spell shield will give us a very high chance to resist spell effects. Super useful. But now we're low on funds again. We'll get our next artifact once we do some more main story stuff. In the meantime, we're going to go see what Obki wants. Right off rip, she's asking me to swear to secrecy. We're going to promise, and then we'll decide afterwards whether we're liars. Obki is concerned about the Dowager Queen Minisera, and the fact that she's paying for the upkeep of a fortress with an evil-sounding name. Apparently, Minisera has been leaving Daggerfall with bundles of letters and returning empty-handed. Scandalous. We are going to investigate these letters. Obki still hasn't let on whether she knows that we're looking for a particular letter, but we'll keep that to ourselves. We have a little under 2 weeks to do this, so off we go to Necromoghan. This is supposed to be a castle. I mean, I try not to be picky, but you could have, put a building here. Come on, this is related to the main quest line. Well, there's not much to say except that as soon as I run into a werewolf, I die. Our objective in this dungeon is to seek out the letters and return to Obki. We don't actually need to fight, but trying to navigate this dungeon while running away from every enemy doesn't sound like a great time to me. And so begins the slow, difficult crawl through this dungeon. Ordinary wildlife like spiders and bats are somewhat of a challenge, but definitely manageable. The number of werewolves in this dungeon, though, is concerning me. 15 deaths. It took me 15 deaths, though, admittedly, I had forgotten that I only needed to get one key item instead of multiple. Still, I thoroughly explored Necromoghan, and Obki is rewarding me. The letters didn't have anything relevant to us, though, which is unfortunate. Hopefully the next quests will have something interesting. Obki gives us some gold, and I head back to the Mages Guild to get my last point before dinging 4. There's now another quest that's available at this level that I forgot to learn about naturally while we were in Wayrest. So we're gonna need to make a pit stop back there before I spend a few weeks at the Mages Guild getting to level 5. Prince Helseth needs a courier, and is offering information about the affair with Daggerfall. So why not? He seems like a trustworthy guy. He wants us to meet him tomorrow, so I'm just gonna sleep in front of him for 24 hours straight. We're to deliver a letter to Lord Castellan. He stresses that we shouldn't read the letter. Definitely not suspicious at all, but pleads for mercy is a professional, and we are definitely not going to— We read the letter. Yeah, this letter is blackmail. Castellan is screwing his sister, who is married to someone else. Why is it always incest with nobles? In any case, we deliver the letter. Castellan looks real nervous, and then we're sent on our merry way back to Wayrest. Helseth is pleased with the situation, gives us some enchanted shoes, and tells us that apparently Wayrest sent advisors to meet with the now-late King Lysandus and King Cameron. Curiouser and curiouser. In any case, that's our level 4 quest complete, so I'm gonna spend a bit at an inn and wait for the Mages Guild to open so that I can train to level 5. Meanwhile, we max out our second primary skill and have to move on to Illusion. We hit 5 and it's time to grab another Daedric artifact. Unfortunately, that means more running around and running up debt. Luckily, while doing this, we get another letter, this time from Sentinel. Prince Lhotun is offering up some information on the haunting of Daggerfall. You know what? It's not letters, so I'm interested. His letter isn't time sensitive, so I figure we'll add it to the queue while we deal with what's already on the docket. While trying to figure out where Ikalan's bank is, the innkeeper offered information on the tempest that ran us aground, so I figured why not check it out, and why does this place have a castle but not Necromoghan, huh? I spent a bit of time in here and eventually decided it was a bust. No reason to spend so long on it since it's not a main story quest. Good news is we found a potion of levitation, which might be very important later on. We're going to just move on and accumulate more debt now. Dania, Anticlear, and Euravius, for good measure, all give us loans of 50,000. And with that, we go back to our favorite half-bird bad witches to get us a real quest. Oh, also it's been 6 months since we took out our first loans. Unfortunately for Pleads for Mercy, he's never going to make the money back. Anyways, we talked to the Coven on the Bluff again, and after a couple of weeks we managed to get them to summon Meridia. Meridia will get us the Ring of Khajiit, and I'll explain why that's important once it's in our possession. Meridia wants us to pay a visit to someone who decided to renege on a deal they made, and let said person know that such ungallant behavior is fatal. Look, any woman with a dress that shows off that much of her thigh is fatal, alright? So, much like the favor we did Boethiah, we do exactly what our Daedric queen wants, and what is it with these side quests having castles, but the former queen apparently has a hole in the ground? What the fuck? Anyways, we're looking for some kind of spellcaster, and since apparently everyone in here is a spellcaster, that takes a bit. At least we found a cool sword upgrade, though. We're going to need at least mithril grade weapons if we want to take on the final dungeons, but I've got a plan for that. Anyways, we kill the bitch, steal her Tims, and make for our contact in another library before the Daedra she summoned can hunt us down and kill us. We grab our reward and bam! The Ring of Khajiit. Now this ring is amazing for us, because as long as we're wearing it, we get a permanent Feet of Notorgo buff, fortifying our speed a significant amount. This means we get to run and attack faster. And, if we actually cast the spell on it, we get to turn invisible. It's super useful, especially since we'd rather avoid combat. While we were in the city, we also identified a few magical items: leather gauntlets of friendship, a shining sapphire, and a leaping short skirt. So, charisma, light, and levitate on each cast. At least one of those is super useful. I sold everything that I didn't need and equipped my new skirt and sapphire. There is, however, one downside to the Ring of Khajiit. One that I wouldn't learn until a little bit later in this run. That is the fact that it too has a limited charge. Now, in later games that wouldn't be an issue, but in Daggerfall, when an artifact runs out of charge, it breaks and disappears. This still wouldn't be an issue, except that our beloved Feet of Notorgo also eats up a cast, and the spell is automatically recast anytime we travel, sleep, or have to re-equip it for some reason. Failing to realize this led me to allow the artifact's health to drop dangerously close to 0 much earlier than I wanted. Oh well, lessons learned, I guess. Anyways, it's back to Castle Daggerfall to talk to the cook now that we're strong enough for her liking. She claims to have some information regarding the letter. Why does everybody seem to know what happened to the letter, but nobody can give me any details about the death of the late king? Whatever, man, I guess I'll help you. Sindasa here wants us to kill a werewolf, as if I didn't risk infection enough as it is. Alright, let's go to Tristor Laboratory then. The lab is apparently on the island of Bethany. So why a cook in Daggerfall has beef with a werewolf here is a mystery to me, but I suppose that's just how it'll be. While we're here, we happen upon a diary that seems to imply Sindasa is behind our target becoming a werewolf in the first place. And when we find and slay the poor beast, he seems to bear a strong resemblance to her. With this in mind, we head back to Daggerfall to hopefully get some answers and learn a little bit more about this letter. Side note, the permanent speed buff we're getting from the Ring of Khajiit feels so good. We return to Sindasa, and she tells us that the letter sent by the Emperor, which was addressed to the Queen of Daggerfall, was in fact received by the Queen of Daggerfall. Unfortunately, Obki seems to be under the impression it was intended for Minnesera. The cook says she was shocked by the contents of this letter, so I guess Uriel Septim is kinda freaky with it. Judging by how Obki and Minnesera don't seem to see eye to eye on much, I think we'll forego questioning Obki, and it's definitely not because doing so is a bad idea. Somehow I doubt that the Dowager Queen has received any notification that the letter is intended for her. Opening the door to Minnesera's room gets the guards on our asses, so we have to talk quickly. Minnesera says Obki never delivered the letter to her, and wants to find out why. Of course, we agree to help. I mean, it's one of the 2 things the Emperor wanted us to do. Minnesera tells us that apparently Lysandus and Cameron died at Crygane, but Lysandus' body was not recovered. We are to seek out the Courier, Herard Coppering, and find out why a letter addressed to Minnesera was delivered to Obki. Escaping from the castle, we head out to Morehouse Manor to find out where Perard might be. A contact there, Vanessa Buckingsley, has knowledge of his courier route. She tells us he's due at Tunbeth Hamlet's palace in 36 days, so off we go to wait again. This one's a little bit different. We don't get to just show up any time before the time limit. We actually have to be there on the same day, so we have some time to kill. I figure that I can spare the time to go back to Sentinel and talk to Prince Lhotun in the meanwhile. Lhotun wants to find out what happened to his elder brother, as he apparently keeps getting different answers when he asks about what happened. We agree to help him, and start by asking around town. We learn a few different things. He never received a public funeral, he apparently came down with a fever and died, he liked books more than swords, which annoyed his father. Failing to learn anything more interesting than that, I return to Tunbeth Hamlet and wait the rest of the month for the courier to arrive. To this end, I sleep for 96 hours straight multiple times in a row. As I go to the palace to meet our friend Perard, I'm handed a letter that tells me that I can get some information on Lhotun's missing brother, so that's progress. In any case, Perard tells us that the letter was addressed to the Queen of Daggerfall, hence why he made the delivery to Obki, not Minnesera. He hands us the torque he received for doing his job, and tells us to show Minnesera that he is a loyal servant and faithful to his order. Torque in hand, we return to Minnesera. Minnesera, once we retell what happened, puts together that the letter must have been sent before Lysandus' death when she was still queen. Minnesera apparently received a letter from Morgaya as well. Now there's a family that seethes under the rule of the Emperor. We're to return to her and find out who has the letter. Ducking back out of the castle, I figure we should make for Sentinel again. Seeing as Morgaya already told us that Gortwag has the letter, it's probably time we paid the orcs a visit as well. Since the letter's not going anywhere, we're going to see what we can learn about Lhotun's brother. This is when we meet an agent of the Underking, a shadowy, mysterious figure who is on the cover of the game. Now there's a lot of lore to do with the Underking, but this isn't really the time or place for it. The agent tells us to check into Castle Phaolem, so of course that's where we're headed next. Okay, why does this place have a castle but Necromoghan doesn't? I'm losing my mind! Anyways, we fight our way through the dungeon a bit until we find a death certificate. Now, call me crazy, but I think this death certificate is structured an awful lot like a diary. In any case, it details the final days of the then 15-year-old Crown Prince Fald, who was sickly and frail most of his life. He was locked in this castle and left to die in an unfortunate case of I can't let this kid be king. Some monstrous political maneuvering by his parents, who unfortunately won't see any justice for this. This letter also explains that his younger sister is Obki, the current queen of Daggerfall. Lhotun's name is also considered ominous by the late Crown Prince, apparently meaning second boy. Lhotun, for the record, is the third son of the royal family of Sentinel. We return to Castle Sentinel with our findings and report to Prince Lhotun what happened. Lhotun seems to have expected this outcome, saying it's what he feared, and in return explains to us that apparently Lysandus was a little man-slut who was cheating on his wife with his court sorceress. Minnesera, understandably, took offense to this, and banished said sorceress to the Isle of Balfiera. He also gives me a pair of magical sandals. Why is it always magic footwear with these nobles? Anyways, they shoot lightning. Sweet. So it's back to Daggerfall to ask Minnesera what to do. She tells us what Morgaya told us hours ago, and then sends us off to Orsinium with the letter that should persuade him to cooperate. Dodging the guards again as we leave, we're off to meet the man himself. He says we can have the letter, but apparently orcs aren't too fond of foreigners, and will be endeavoring to make acquiring the letter a challenge. They do, as orc sergeants are known to poison their weapons, meaning that if I take a hit, there's a pretty good chance that I'm going to get poisoned and die. Unfortunately, I didn't stock up on any cures, so I'll have to do that and then come back. To this end, I went and purchased the necessary ingredients for a few cure poison potions, only to find that if I want to craft them, I'll have to make rank 5 at a temple, or rank 3 at the Dark Brotherhood, which is just... damn it. I guess we're making use of the Ring of Khajiit's activated ability here. Turning invisible and running past most of the enemies should be a viable strategy here, except for the simple fact that I don't have these dungeons memorized and I'm not following a guide of any sort. I don't want to use this too often because I don't know how many charges it has. What I do know, however, is that if I use it too much, it breaks, and I really like that speed boost. It feels really good. We skip the first few enemies and generally try to avoid orc sergeants when we can. We find ourselves in a suspiciously ornate room with a letter upon a pedestal. Apparently, the Totem of Tiber Septim was found, and a minor lord in Wayrest called Woodborne has it. The Emperor was trying to get Minisera to convince him to hand it over either to herself or Lady Brisciana, the lady we talked to at the beginning. We turn invisible again and abscond with the letter. We have to turn invisible 2 more times in order to escape the orcs. The shaman outside kept blowing me up the instant I was in sight. Once we were out, we head back to Daggerfall and talk to Minisera. Once we do, she immediately warns us that, hey, that shit is cosmic top secret and is probably out to everybody now. She warns us that the only safe master for the totem is the Emperor. We're thanked for our services, and now we head out again. So we've done it! We completed the first of the 2 objectives that old Septim gave us. Yippee! Unfortunately, we've gained another objective in the process. That being to recover the totem and stop all these petty-ass nobles from doing something that everyone will end up regretting. Now we're going to receive a few letters. Some will be from friends, and basically explain what the Totem of Tiber Septim is for. These letters will explain that it is a device to control Numidium. If you're familiar with Morrowind, which I would kind of expect given how much more popular Morrowind is, it's basically a Kulikan. The same kind of giant Dwemer mech. There's also some lore stuff that gets mentioned that, while interesting, would only serve to pad the length of this already too long script. Receipt of these letters completes the Mantella Revealed quest. We also receive a threatening letter from an anonymous person. This marks the beginning of the mild annoyance of getting jumped by the occasional knight or barbarian. Luckily, it's only for 2 weeks, which gives us just enough time to get right on the cusp of level 6 before we receive the quest proper. This gets us maxed out illusion, meaning that all 3 of our primary skills are maxed out. After far too long, I receive a letter from Princess Elisana at Castle Wayrest. And wouldn't you know it, Lord Woodborne has told her that we're just swell. So we're off to pay her a visit. Golly gee, I sure hope she's as pretty as her sister. We make our way to the castle, and she promises that her acquaintance has something that might help us. All we have to do is escort her cousin. It's just a teensy-weensy favor, how bad could it be? Anyways, we escort her cousin to her friend. Shortly after completing this and returning to Daggerfall, we start getting attacked by humanoid enemies. Luckily for us, their agility doesn't seem to be much better than ours, and we're able to hit them rather reliably. We pick up a dwarven helmet off this guy, which is neat. All these letters have some variation of "Kill pleads for mercy, K thanks bye" on them, signed by a mysterious W. Wonder who that might be. Maybe Morgaia's gravity is confused these days, who knows? Anyways, the plan was to hit level 6, almost 7, and talk to Elisana again. She's supposed to offer us a quest to basically assassinate Lord Castellian, the guy Helseth blackmailed from before, but apparently because we did the quest with Gortwog already, she won't offer it. Unfortunate, but only one of those is actually necessary for the main quest. This one seems like it's completely disconnected from the others anyways, and I'm not sure why UESP lists it as a main story quest. Oh well. I guess we're going straight to level 7, almost 8 instead. While training, I am accosted at the Mages Guild by a zombie of all things. When I kill it, it turns out to be a message from the King of Worms. Manamarco seems to have a request for us. Now, I'm not one to turn down royalty, but unfortunately for him, I have some prior engagements to attend to. Just barely getting to the edge of level 8, but not quite, finishes off our restoration skill, and then we have to collect our next artifact, the Ebony Blade. While gathering funds for this, I also get a letter from Sentinel, asking for help with our next quest in the region. They'll have to wait while I gather money, and in the meanwhile explain why we need to get the Ebony Blade next. Up until this point, our Dwarven Longsword has been more than enough for most enemies. However, several of these upcoming quests require us to take on Liches and Ancient Vampires, which will require at least mithril-grade equipment. It is technically possible to just reload the shops infinitely until we find a weapon of mithril or better, but that's extremely boring and takes forever. Not to mention, if we're going to do that, we might as well get all of our gear dripped out. In any case, we gather our funds, return to our collective magic tricks, and summon Mephala. She wants us to kill a noble, probably the easiest task a Daedric prince has asked of us, so we oblige. Get the sword, and then stow it away for future use. Now, I haven't delved too much into how the artifacts actually work, but this is important. We are only going to be using the Ebony Blade on our most important high-level enemies. The Ebony Blade is going to serve as our intermediary for these enemies, until we can stumble across something useful naturally. Why don't we just use it as soon as we get it? Because unlike in future installments, once you run out of charge, the artifact vanishes. Unlike in future installments, they don't simply wait in our inventory for a soul gem to recharge it. Once it's used up, we do not get it back, and the Ebony Blade has a cast on strike spell, meaning that once it connects, we lose a charge with it. Not to mention that the liches we face will probably need to use it for its far silence just to stop them from instantly killing us with a fireball, like that orc shaman from earlier. With the blade acquired, I figure our quests should be done on a first-come, first-served basis, so we head once again to Skurg Barrow. Manny here has a task for us that involves killing a lich. Fuck. Luckily, we're going to Castle Sentinel to do it, so we can talk to Queen Akarithi once we've killed this lich. The dungeoning to get to the lich is pretty fruitful. We're at level 7 now, so humanoid enemies, which we're facing a decent amount of, can now drop dwarven and occasionally mithril equipment. We pick up a dwarven katana, which is an upgrade to our longsword, and a mithril mace, which I'm praying that we never have to use. Eventually, I come across a lever-pulling puzzle that confounds me slightly before finally I run into the Lich. After getting instantly paralyzed and exploding a couple of times, I conclude that the best way to try to combat him is to use the Ebony Blade's Far Silence cast to force him into melee combat. The Ebony Blade has a plus 15 long blade enchantment on it, which combined with the fact that we've been using longswords and katanas the whole game, pushes us to a respectable 52 in the skill. In addition to the massive bonus being an Ebony tier weapon gives it, we managed to push through and defeat the Lich, collecting his soul for our friend Manny. On our way out, we talk to Queen Akarithi, and she wants us to break into Castle Wayrest and recover a painting. Seems to me like the kind of thing you hire the Thieves Guild for, but you know what? I got you, babe. I go drop off the soul with Manny, and for this, Manny tells us about Zurin Arctus, Tiber Septim's battle mage, who allegedly became the Underking. Manny warns us that if Zurin gets control of the totem, he'll throw all of Tamriel into chaos. How ominous. Anyways, now we have to head back to Wayrest and do a little painting raid. Castle Wayrest's dungeon is absolutely massive. I spent a good hour here before I finally found the painting, and even had to leave once when I caught the plague. I found some dwarven armor, a mithril broadsword, and when I finally found the painting, I decided now was the time to book it. When you look at the painting, it describes a scene wherein men from Wayrest are debating with a man from Daggerfall. Eventually, the man from Daggerfall is casually assassinated. It probably doesn't take a genius to conclude that good King Lysandus didn't fall in honorable battle as the tale goes. We abscond from the castle with the painting and return to Queen Akarithi, who asks us if we looked at the painting. Something tells me we weren't supposed to, so I lie straight to her face and say I didn't. Pleased with this, she gives me my gold, and I'm carrying too much of it already apparently. Oh well, it's not like money's really a problem for me. That clears up our level 7 obligations, so it's back to the Mages Guild with me for a bit more training. Luckily, we don't have much more to do. We train to level 8, and as we step outside, we get a letter. An agent of the Underking wants to meet us. Well, no point in making them wait, I suppose. We head out immediately, as this is our only new lead. Upon meeting him, we're informed that the necromancers have cursed an item and given it to the blades. The Underking apparently has reason not to wish harm upon the blades. Probably something to do with that whole Zurin Arctus deal. And we're to do it within 321 days! We have almost a year to do this. But no worries, we'll get it done long before then. Though I can't say Ikalan is likely to be happy to see me again, so we're going to avoid any major cities. Oh, come on! Why does this castle get to be a castle, but Necromoghan is forgotten? This is bullshit! I'm calling Julian LeFay, this is bullshit! Anyways, this building is fairly large and complex, but after a while, I managed to find my way to a room that has the cloth amulet we're trying to get. After a very lucky fight with an ancient vampire, where I managed to get him to hit the wall with one of his spells and not get hit at all, we escape and return to the agent of the Underking. The agent tells us that Lysandus did not die in battle, and was slain by treachery. The monument to him at the battlefield is an empty tomb, and he gives us directions to the real one in Menevia. Great! Everything is slowly coming together, and we're 2 quests away from the final stretch. The next quest is actually us following up on the clue we got from Lhotun way back at level 5, when we helped him find out what happened to his eldest brother, Fald. He mentioned a tower on the Isle of Balfiera where Minisera had banished the former court sorceress to. Now, we can actually pay her a visit, unlike when I did so fruitlessly during my first playthrough. This place was rough at level 5 with okay stats. It's going to be rough with stats comparable to a level 3 character. Hopefully my equipment can help bridge the gap a little better. Oh my god. So I didn't remember exactly where to go. This is to be expected, as I haven't visited Derelict Tower in nearly 3 years. And it's the longest, most complex dungeon in the game as far as I can tell. Rooms that will teleport you, enemies aplenty, it's rough out here. I eventually come to a room that I recognize, and from there it's smooth sailing. We take out the second Lich in the dungeon and talk to Madora. She tells us we need to go back to Shedungent to retrieve something of Nulfaga's, a great unicorn horn. So we agree, and now I need to fight my way back out of the dungeon. So after forgetting the way to the Great Unicorn Horn, and exploring about 300% more of Shedungent than I ever wanted to, I realized my mistake by going back to one of the first rooms I visited and opening a secret door. I had remembered about 95% of the route to the Horn, but fumbled at the last hurdle, and now I have to go back to Derelict Tower and pray that I have that route figured out. Here I go! It's actually pretty smooth this time, barring the deaths to the enemies. It turns out that if you don't have a lot of health, you get killed pretty easily. She hopes she can count on us for further aid, and with that we can leave again. Now, we won't be talking to her again until we're level 10, but we do have just one more bit of business to contend with before we continue. This was initially where I tried to get the quest for Baronziah's book. I had figured that we had a month in-game to kill, so we might as well wait, but our reputation with Baronziah must not have been high enough because I waited for a long time and it never arrived. I suspect if we'd been able to do Elisana's robe, we may have gained enough reputation, but since that quest got locked off for us at level 5, I wasn't about to try and figure out how to raise our reputation with her slowly. Instead, I went around and gathered the last of the necessary gold we'd need for our final artifact. No tears from me, we're moving on to level 10 and the final 5 main quests of the game. First up is the Dust of Restful Death. Madora contacts us via telepathy in what could have been a throwback to Arena and tells us about this supposed dust. We're sent to Gortwog, who apparently knows where this dust is, and unfortunately one of his soldiers got a tad uppity and we killed him for his adamantium pauldron. We're sent to a dungeon on the condition that Madora supports Gortwog's claim to the heart, which is something that she'll supposedly understand. So off we go to our not-quite-radiant dungeon. After a surprisingly short jaunt through this dungeon, we find our quarry. Upon killing the mummy and getting the dust, we also find a letter written by Gortwog to Madora. Seems like interesting stuff. We return to Derelict Tower, and while I'll never say getting to Madora is easy, it's definitely much more manageable once you know where to go. And now we learn that apparently the court of Wayrest doesn't care much for the Empire or the Emperor. Then she tells us to fuck off for another month again. It's during this time that I figure it's time to return to our favorite group of bad witches and get our 4th and final artifact. Theoretically, I could have simply rested or loitered for 96 hours at a time, like 9 or 10 times inside the dungeon. But that felt boring, and there wasn't really any other time it felt appropriate to grab this artifact. This time, we're summoning Periite. That's right, it's Spellbreaker. He wants us to go kill an ancient vampire for him, and for once we're not supposed to meet with our contact in a library. Using the ebony blade, we make short work of the ancient vampire and make our way over to get our reward, and it is oh so sweet. We've now gotten everything we could possibly want, barring any additional magical items. This is about as strong as we're going to get. To be honest, at this point, I felt pretty comfortable against most enemies, but I am still dreading Daedra. As of yet, we've not had to face any. Our most dangerous foes so far have been ancient vampires and liches. They've been manageable up until now, but the ebony blade won't last long enough to see us through to the end of the game if we resort to just constantly using it. I have some faith we'll get an ebony, orcish, or Daedric long blade of some type eventually, But if we have to face a Daedric Lord, or even worse, an ancient Lich, we're going to be in a bit of trouble. I'm hoping to save Spellbreaker for such fights, but even then, when we use it, it's only a 60% chance to reflect any given spell, which means there's probably going to be a lot of dying and reloading. Yay. Can't wait. In any case, we're going to make our way back to Madora since she should be done by the time we meet her, and we'll get the next quest. Once more through the dungeon, and we're given the readied powder, which we must sprinkle on the corpse of the late King Lysandus. It won't put his shade to rest, but it will let us speak with him to find out how. We know that his body isn't at Crygane Field where the empty monument stands. This is fine because we were given directions to the real tomb, the one in Menevia, in an earlier quest by the agent of the Underking. So it's off to Menevia for us. We find Lysandus' tomb, and after getting lost for a while, I find this skull I need to use in order to teleport to the part of the tomb that houses the body. After fighting through a bunch of undead, we are greeted by Lysandus' spirit. He thanks us for soothing his spirit, but if we really want to lay him to rest, we are going to have to kill Lord Woodborne, that noble whose name we heard from before. We have our new quest, and so it's off to Woodborne Hall for us. After pulling a few levers, we lower this guy's indoor drawbridge to the upper levels of his castle and begin looking for Woodborne himself. We find him in a hallway, guarded by a giant and a few centaurs, and upon striking him once, he tells us that the wiser Argonian would have let sleeping kings lie before confessing to the murder of King Lysandus. Well, that narrows it down, doesn't it? Anyways, we kill him, and with his dying breath, he says it's up to Gothrid. Who's Gothrid, you ask? Oh, yeah, he's the current king of Daggerfall. Uh-oh. This political situation is going to get really hairy. In any case, now we can walk around the city of Daggerfall at night without getting attacked by ghosts all the time. How convenient. Ah, we've done it. We put the soul of the late King Lysandus to rest, and all is well in the world. Surely now I can come home to Cyrodiil? Oh, wait, shit, the letter. Something about the Totem of Tiber Septim, but I don't have any real leads on it. Oh boy, a letter. I wonder who it's from. Briscienna, we haven't talked to her in a good long while now, have we? She wants to meet us in Wayrest. Oh boy, that can't be good. The fate of the entire empire could be at stake. Guess we'd better head over to her now. Briscienna tells us apparently that the late Woodborne once held the totem, but apparently not anymore. She says she has reason to believe Gothrid has it. You know, the current king of Daggerfall, the guy who Woodborne had on his last breath. As we are apparently good at getting into these kinds of places, she wants us to raid the vault of Castle Daggerfall and retrieve the totem ourselves. Oh boy, here we go. Back to Daggerfall it is then. This time, with a vengeance. Briscienna promises us the Warlock's ring if we can get the totem and return it to her, which sounds like a pretty nice ring. It's fine at this point. Probably better than the Ring of Khajiit, but I've got something better in mind. We're off to Daggerfall to raid the last of the 3 major kingdoms' vaults for their precious information. You might feel stupid, but have you ever spent 15 seconds bashing in a door only to realize it was a fucking closet? Anyways, we make our way to the vault room, and it is by far the most impressive of the 3. A massive vault with 12 magically sealed chambers is suspended over a checker-tiled room, absolutely crawling with guards. We defeat the guards with some difficulty and eventually find a room with a wheel that lowers the vault. But it comes down on top of us, which is a problem. After some fucking around, reloading saves, and not remembering what to do, I interact with these chains. The one on the right gives you water breathing, rendering Pleads for Mercy's only racial advantage moot the only time that it's story relevant. The one in the middle teleports you onto a platform, and the one on the left teleports you into the sky high enough that it kills me. After lowering the vault and teleporting out from under it, we're able to grab some loot and the Totem of Tiber Septim. As we're leaving, it has some words for us, warning us that we are not worthy to carry the totem. We have a year and a day to deliver it to someone who is worthy. Now, we've got a long list of potential candidates here. This quest is called Totem. Who gets the totem, after all? This is essentially where we choose the ending that we want. The list is as follows. Queen Akarithi of Sentinel, King Gothrid of Daggerfall, King Edwir of Wayrest, Warchief Gortwog of Orsinium, Briscienna, and by extension Uriel Septim VII of Cyrodiil, the King of Worms, Mannimarco, and last but not least, the Underking. Over the next few days, they each send us letters promising rewards and pleading their case. Unfortunately for them, I already have a particular candidate in mind, and it should be no surprise to anyone in the know that it's the Underking. The Underking is also promising us the Necromancer's Amulet, the very same one from every subsequent game. As we deliver the totem to the Underking, we get another vision from Nulfaga this time. She says we should visit her in Shedungent. Apparently, our work is not yet done. We tell her skeleton to shut up, and after killing a couple of humanoids, we gear up and talk to Nulfaga again. This is it, the final gauntlet that will lead us to the end of the game. She speaks in metaphors, describing each of the potential holders of the totem before sending us to the Mantellan Crux. We are to look for a green jewel of unusual size, the eponymous Mantella. The first room has 3 floating platforms, one with a levitation spell on a bust. Taking this spell, we can go down to the Frost Daedra and kill it, as well as going up to 2 high rooms and 2 lower rooms to pull a combination of levers that opens the way to this nefarious, fucked up evil guy. The Ebony Blade makes short work of him, but I'm not going to lie, I don't think my artifacts are going to hold out to the end of this dungeon. Stepping on the red carpet teleports us to another room. This room has a floating platform, this time with a pyramid on it. The pyramid has a trapdoor at the top, so it appears that the goal is to get inside. Well, after finding this lever that we can't interact with, and a door up in the corner of the room again, we come across this stable-looking individual surrounded by corpses and near a bed. He wants us to speak his name in order for us to pass, so it's off to find clues. At the bottom of the room, we find a Lich, who kills himself after getting his spell reflected. There are also 2 vampires and an ancient vampire, who keep casting fatigue-lowering spells at me. They seem to be guarding some graves. After disposing of them and interacting with the graves, we find one that opens the door below, and another that reads, "Here lies the spirit of Benefactor." Huh, neat, I guess that's his name. We speak it to him, and when we come back out, the pyramid's open. And as soon as we enter, the Ebony Blade breaks. Down 1 artifact. Luckily, I picked up an ebony katana earlier, but that doesn't have a vampirism enchant on it, and it doesn't have plus 15 to Longblade, so we're going to be losing out on a decent chunk of our ability to actually hit things. No turning back now, though. We go deeper into the pyramid, and are teleported once again. The next area has what appears to be a mountain in the middle of a room. Taking the elevator in the hallway, we eventually come to a sort of floating crossroads. Touching one of the levers, it activates the platform, and we climb to a sort of temple in the sky. Opening each door and touching a switch opens up another teleporter. The room we find ourselves in isn't unlike a regular feature of normal dungeons, save for one key thing. This door teleports you into a cage you can't escape from. Now, to anyone who's played Bard's Tale, you might recognize this as a kind of stasis chamber, except that the cage will raise and lower, seemingly intending to make you into a pincushion for the orcs below. The only way out is death or a reload, so don't touch that door. After this is a room absolutely covered in fire. The first head gives us a hint that tells us how to complete this room, and then we have to spin all the heads so that they face the big head in the middle. Touch the wrong one, and splat. We get up to the top of the head, and who should await us but everybody's favorite madman? That's right, this is Shegaroth. This room was one of the harder ones to get through simply because all of the Daedra are fire immune. So while reflecting a spell stops me from dying, it doesn't actually do any damage back to them, making it somewhat difficult to stop them all from casting a million spells at me. After getting thoroughly confused, I touched all the skulls again and accidentally locked myself out of the room. Returning to the one skull I touched that gave a door opening noise, I open the door at the bottom of the elevator again, answer the skull's question, and we're off to the next section. After a somewhat confusing dungeoning section, where we saw some armor that looked pretty neat, we run into old Sheo in his study again. Shegaroth has a question for us. What is his other favored weapon? Now, if you know anything about the Mantellan Crux, it's this. The answer is a crossbow. because the map looks like a crossbow. This part is somewhat infamous. But then, the coolest part in the entire game. We're told to arm ourselves, but Shegaroth doesn't mean prepare to fight. What he means is for us to arm the crossbow with ourselves. We teleport out of the area, find a device while many Daedra lords laugh at us, and we lower the entire platform, freeing up an enormous sword. Then, while we step into the role of the bolt of the crossbow, we are teleported up to another platform, where we watch the sword turn and form a bridge to our exit. From here, we find an elevator down to the last area, a short gauntlet full of ghosts and Daedra. We defeat a few and find our way to the last enormous room, with a huge green jewel at the center. We touch the crystal and finally beat Daggerfall. We are teleported back to Mundus, and are instructed by Nulfaga to read from the Book of Time, and read fate as it shall be recorded upon the Elder Scrolls. We see what the Underking does with his newfound power, and our work here is done. Oh, and this is when Nulfaga tells us the password for her Lich statue. This is our final build. The speed stat is only as high as it was because of the Feat of Notorgo spell cast by the Ring of Khajiit and the Necromancer's Amulet. All the leveling skills we used are at 51, save for Mysticism, our minor skill. Technically, we could have gotten it to 51 as well, which would have given us another level, but I said we were going to do all of the quests we could as early as we could do them. And since the minimum level for Journey to Aetherius is 10 it would be. Our running ended up being our highest skill at a staggering 91, with Longblade and Stealth following quickly behind. Now, I chose to use Longblade specifically because of the Ebony Blade giving us a plus 15 to the stat while we had it. So for a decent portion at the end, we had a Longblade skill probably around 86 or 87. Looking back on this run, I think lowering my luck and improving my willpower may have made for a slightly worse class overall, but truth be told, this challenge was tough as is. If you guys have any ideas for future Daggerfall challenge runs, I'm happy to hear them. Do you have any other ideas to make even weaker classes? This build is terrible, don't use it. Have a good one, guys. Thanks for watching.